Good evening. I wanted to speak to you folks tonight about the anatomy and physiology of Bigfoot, how these things are built, and when we look at the excellent Patterson-Gimlin film here, this is the M.K. Davis version, and we look at the work of Dr. Meldrum, which a lot of this information has been lifted from, a lot of ideas I've gotten from listening to encounters, my own experiences, and we've done a lot of supernatural out there stuff on Sasquatch lately and other cryptids, and I wanted to get a little more scientific. And not really going to discuss origins so much, creation versus evolution and how these things came about or why, but just look at what they are. And here we have a Neanderthal skeleton. This was a recreation done by Dr. Meldrum. And he has PhDs in anatomy and primatology and all that other kind of stuff. So he basically took a Neanderthal skeleton, repositioned a few things, and scaled it up like 2 or 3 times the size. Then he made a skull of what he thought a Sasquatch skull would look like, somewhere between maybe a mountain gorilla, but much more upright and not as spread out as a human skeleton and skull, something with a little more of a sagittal crest, but with a huge jaw muscle. So this was very telling, and I've seen a number of his presentations. I've read his books. I've also listened to a number of other experts, drawn my own conclusions, and it's quite fascinating when you think of these creatures. When you hear reports of them running 30, 40 miles an hour, when you hear them moving silently through the brush but being 8, 9 feet tall, when you hear stories of them snapping over 3 and 4 inch trees, they are quite incredible creatures, and the pure physicality of these things really make them the masters of their environment. So one of the most prominent features that people commonly report about Sasquatch is its head. They often have a sagittal crest, big jaws, big eyes, and I think there's a lot to discuss here. Now, the sagittal crest goes along with having a huge jaw because that's an attachment point for muscles. Just picture that huge jaw and all these muscles wrapping around the sides of the skull, attaching at that sagittal crest, giving these things the ability to bite through almost anything, crunch through bones, the toughest meats, the toughest sinew, put a handful of walnuts in there and crunch them all up, put a handful of fruit in there, pits and everything, and crunch them all up. Not to mention tubers and anything else they can get their hands on. Not to mention they have been known to go through human garbage. So who knows? But with a massive jaw and massive sagittal crest, they just have a biting power unbelievable. And I'm sure a lot like a lot of other animals, it's probably a great tool for them too to crack things open and bite things. And their dentition would have to match, that they would have to have a mouth similar to humans that could be equally well for eating meat as fruits and vegetables. And look at mountain gorillas that are all vegetarian, and you look at chimpanzees that eat a lot of fruit and some meat. When you start getting into 700, 800, 1,000 pounds, 2,000 pounds for the utmost giantest of these creatures, you're really hard pressed to do that just eating vegetable matter alone. And then you hear reports of them running 20, 30, 40 miles an hour really fast and climbing trees and bending over trees that are 3 or 4 inches in thickness, snapping them like twigs. It takes a lot of calories, and I think having a very robust digestive system, something short track closer to like a bear or a lion, something similar to like what humans have, but with, they can eat basically whatever they find. They can dig up roots, they can crunch nuts, they can crack bones, they can process whatever kind of meat that they want. And I think their whole physiology starts at their skull, their ability to process and eat things. Those large eyes help them see at night. They have stereoscopic vision. They can focus and see and hunt. I'm sure they have an incredible sense of smell, incredible hearing as well. Even human hearing can be quite acute if it hasn't been exposed to all the things that humans get exposed with all the time. So it just helps them be the masters of their environment. A skull that big is going to have a relatively large brain. The stereoscopic vision is a sign of intelligence, and these things are truly the masters of their environment, starting with their head. Let's talk about the Sasquatch foot for a minute. This is what gives them the term Bigfoot. And when you look at a human foot like there on the right, our bones are close together, they're towards the back, we have an arch in our foot. This is what allows us our upright posture to support our weight, how we're built. We're very straight in comparison to a lot of other animals. We're upright, and we're kind of the end of the evolution, as you would say, where we can't get any more upright than we are now. And the other thing about our bone structure as humans is if we start getting to extreme weights, 3, 4, 5, 600 pounds, we can't support that weight that well. We can't walk very well and move very well, much less run and hunt and walk on uneven surfaces and all that other stuff. So with a Sasquatch foot, it would make sense that their bones are spread out a little bit more to help support that weight. The foot would have to be huge. There'd be a lot more flesh and padding underneath. You would have that midfoot flexibility as opposed to an arch, because basically if Sasquatches had an arch in their leg, they would flatten it under the weight. So they're similar. They're just built a bit differently than us, just to help support that weight. And the infamous mid-tarsal break that everybody likes to throw around to sound smart, what that is the foot is so flexible that when they walk, it leaves a little raised portion because they push off of their foot differently than we do. It's kind of a continuous push and roll off as opposed to heel-toe weight transfer that a human does. So that's one of the telltale ways you can tell a Sasquatch track versus like a hoax. A hoax will just be kind of a smooth, even print. And you also see the toes dug in on a lot of fake tracks. That's because it's like a wood board. And when you push off the wood board, the toes take all the weight. So it's really quite interesting how their foots are built. And it kind of makes it go all the way up their skeleton. And everything has to be balanced. So one of the things that people often get wrong about Sasquatch, and I think it's because they think about it in human terms, is even if they see a moderately sized one, say 7.5 feet long, they have something to gauge that with. Its head is the same height as a branch, or it's looking in through a window and the head is midway up a window or something, and that's about 7.5 feet or 8 feet. I think people think about it in human forms. It was 7.5 feet tall. Its shoulders were 4 feet wide. I mean, that sucker had to be all of 450 pounds. And I'm like, it's probably 650 or 750. There are terms for this, and not being a super scientific guy, I'll just break it down in layman's terms. The taller you make something, like if you take a 6-foot man and make him, who weighs 200 pounds, and make him 12 feet high, double his size, he's not going to be 400 pounds. He's going to be like 1,500 pounds. When you make something bigger and bigger, the weight gets bigger and bigger, because it's not just a vertical dimension you're changing everything about that. And bone structure has to support that. Muscle mass has to be able to make it go. And I'm not talking about enough muscle mass just to get it to walk or plod along or sit up. These things have to hunt, move, and even if you look at the great apes, like mountain gorillas and chimpanzees that are so incredibly strong even for their size, they just have such dense muscle fiber. Then you feed them a high protein diet mixed with lots of fruits and vegetables and have them run around in the woods all day. You're basically building an incredible Hulk. You're building like a Superman-like creature. And it's no wonder that these things absolutely dominate what they are, because they got the total package. So the other thing to consider is the regional variations. Some look, very human-like. Some look very chimpanzee-like. Some have a snout. Some, in the south and warmer climates seem to be 7, 8 feet tall, maybe 9 foot at the max. And in more northern climates, more arboreal type forest, they seem to be very huge, 8, 9, 10, 11 feet tall. Absolutely gigantic in size and huge across. And I think some of this has to do with Bergman's rule, which is the farther north you go in latitude, the more large the species tend to be. The bears get bigger, the deer get bigger, the skunks get bigger. It's not always the rule. Sometimes they get smaller. But like mountain lions that are in Alaska and Canada get, 200-300 pounds. They get absolutely huge. But the mountain lions that live in South America are like 70-80 pounds. And it's not always the rule. There are exceptions. But generally when you go into harsher, colder climates, a larger body mass tends to suit you. And I think as we look at the different varieties, it kind of makes sense. and we've talked a lot about this on this channel, that some maybe eat more meat, some maybe eat more vegetables, some maybe hunt more actively, some maybe more ambush predators. Taking 1,000-pound, 12-foot tall fur-covered Sasquatch and putting him in the bayou where it's 105 degrees, that thing's going to have a hard time. But something slighter built with less hair, still incredibly strong, still very much bigger than humans, but something slightly built, something a lot more efficient built than robust built tends to make a lot more sense when you're talking about these creatures and how they survive and live. So I think we just need to look at ourselves, great apes, and a little bit of common sense, bears, other omnivorous species, other large species around, and see how they handle the environment. One of the rules I always go by is, am I finding coyote poop? Am I finding deer tracks? Are there bears in the area? Are there mountain lions in the area? Are there water sources? And when you look at these things, you support the idea from a scientific point of view that Sasquatch could definitely be in the area, or it supports sightings. Maybe even sometimes a year as the water sources dry up, so they move and they come back, just like deer herds. Maybe they migrate. And I think maybe some have resident populations. It's all things we have to consider. And a Sasquatch in Southern California might look very different from one from Northern California, and might behave differently from one that's in Washington State. And different varieties, interbreeding, an Inuit Indian looks very different than a sub-Saharan African person, looks very different from a Caucasian person. So you just have to understand that there can be a lot of variances and still generally be the same species and build. So one of the things we have to consider about the physicality, the physiology, the anatomy of these creatures, someone brought up a good point that I think I thought about but didn't really put into terms, was not only do they need a lot of calories to survive, and it's nice to talk about these creatures as a natural creature in scientific terms. It's my own fault. Too often on this channel we talk about the paranormal, weirder aspects, alternative theories, because for me often these things are seen in places like in deserts or very barren areas, or places that wouldn't really support a large creature. Either not enough water, not enough calories, not enough cover for them. And that's why we get off into some of the paranormal or oddball explanations for these creatures. But it's fun to kind of look at it from a scientific point of view. Anyway, so somebody brought up to me, it was a really good point. Not only do these things require a lot of calories, 25, 30, 40,000 calories a day, and by the way, I think that maybe they eat every 2 or 3 days. So even if they need 25,000 calories a day, they're probably going to consume 60, 70,000 calories in one day. Eat an entire deer essentially and then not eat for a couple days. Kind of like how lions do. 25,000 calories, that's kind of like a rough estimate. And I could be way off in my calorie calculations. I did a whole video on it a while back. But a really good point that brought up is it's not only calories, the amount of water. And when not that I've ever seen Sasquatch with a water bottle or camelback or a canteen, they probably couldn't go too far from a water source. I mean, they'd have to be, within 4 or 5 hours. I mean, they're probably pretty efficient. I don't know if they sweat like humans or if they're like a dog or a cat that doesn't sweat. I would assume that they do. They would have to have, with that many calories being expelled and that much muscle mass, they'd have to have a way to exchange that heat. So maybe they sweat. Maybe they have some other apparatus for expelling heat that we don't know about. I have no idea. I'm sure their hair and their fur has something to do with their thermal regulation, but they'd have to consume so much water. They'd have to be near a water source. We're talking gallons upon gallons. And when you don't carry a canteen or have a cup, I mean, you can bend over and suck it right out of a pond, I guess, or a river, but it would just be gallons and gallons and gallons of water. And I think they would have to have maybe a really good sense of smell, like some animal species can smell water, or they'd have to know classically where they were, or what types of trees they could dig up. I mean, even if they're eating really lush foliage, they're such a large creature that it's probably evaporating from their breath and burning off of their skin faster than they can replenish it. So they would have to have a lot of water around. So when I see these things or hear reports about them in areas that don't have a lot of water times of years, it makes me think maybe something else is going on with them. But it's something to consider in your own thought process when thinking about the physicality of these creatures, the amount of calories, water it would take, the amount of cover, what these things could maybe eat that they know is medicinal or help them out, the quality of food that they're getting. And there's just a lot to think about when it comes to the anatomy of these creatures. So thanks for watching this video. It's kind of fun to do something a little more logic-based, science-based. And for me, that's where the duality of this creature, the understanding of these creatures, is it doesn't always make sense for something this large that needs so many resources that would be able to survive in a lot of areas that they're seen in, yet they are seen, and yet they do. So there's so much more about these creatures we don't know, how they get water sources, their physiology of how they're able to maybe store water, how they get enough salt and nutrients and minerals, what they do. It's absolutely fascinating to speculate. And thank you guys very much for watching. If you like this content, I encourage you to hit the thumbs up. It helps this channel out. And please subscribe if you haven't already. And stay safe in the woods, folks.